Welcome to Tracks to Success, brought to you by Presentation Partners. This is the podcast that brings you inspiring people and their inspiring stories. How did they find their way to the top, and how can their path help you do the same? Here's your host, network broadcaster, executive, and entrepreneur, Kraig Kann.
Right now, on this edition of Tracks to Success, if you've ever dreamed for a trip to outer space, this is a man that's truly lived it. A former naval officer, aviator, test pilot, aerospace engineer, and NASA astronaut, and a veteran of 6 space shuttle missions. And if that's not enough to boost a resume, he is the only American to have commanded 5 spaceflight missions. A Notre Dame graduate, he found his way to the U.S. Navy in '75 and logged 125 night carrier landings aboard the USS John F. Kennedy between 1977 and 1980. He is probably best known for seats aboard Columbia, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavor. But this soft-spoken Oregon resident, who was born in New York, is now a happily retired consultant who celebrates 2 daughters and his wife and enjoys tennis and his drums, and is an honorary member of the Musicians Union and the American Federation of Musicians. So what on earth do you even ask a man who's docked with the Russian Mir and also the International Space Station multiple times? What stands out the most? Which outer space movie is his favorite? His name is Jim Wetherbee. His inspiring story, and this edition of Tracks to Success starts now. Jim, I have to be honest, it's not too often that I get to speak with an American space hero. This is an honor and a privilege. I'm really glad you're joining me here on Tracks to Success, so thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks to our mutual friend, Dwayne. What a great guy he is, and I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
Yes, Dwayne Cummings, past guy on Tracks to Success. My first question is really pretty easy. Tell me about this. You walk across a platform to the spacecraft for the first ever time, knowing you're about to take a journey that few really could ever do or be a part of. What was that feeling like for you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, Craig. The morning of launch, let me back up just a little bit and say the morning of launch, an astronaut, if he or she is doing the job correctly, is really focused. You're thinking about the present. Do not make any mistakes. Don't think too far into the future. Nothing else matters. The future never comes until later anyway. So you're really focused and making sure you're doing things correctly. As you walk down that gantry into the white room to ingress the vehicle for the very first time, all of a sudden, out of your peripheral vision, you see the giant 12-foot in diameter solid rocket booster to the left, and you look at that booster and there's a single word printed in 2-inch high block letters printed vertically on this booster, and it says loaded. And it suddenly takes your breath away and you think to yourself, oh man, school's out, it's time to go to work. And then you go right back into the mode of making sure you do everything right, put the harness on correctly. And some of the folks are pretty nervous when they're helping. And on my first flight, the technicians, who are wonderful people, tried to put my harness on upside down. So you really stay focused on every single task, regardless of how small the task is, to make sure you do not make a mistake.
Wow. I mean, they're nervous. What about you? I mean, were you ever concerned for the worst? Does that even enter your mind? Do you allow it to enter your mind? How do you stay that focused with no nervous energy?
So most of the time, being an astronaut, you don't think about that. There are a few instances where it does enter your mind, and the classic one is the night your head hits the pillow on the night before your first launch attempt, when I suddenly realized I've just run out of time to get any smarter and it's too late to quit. And you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that, because you have to get a good night's sleep so that you can wake up the next morning and perform at peak effectiveness, and with supreme mental awareness of everything going on around you. So my first thought as I tried to go to sleep was to try to calm myself down. This is the only job I've ever really wanted to have since I was 10 years old. And I found that was helpful, but insufficient, because I could still die tomorrow. And that's not what I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. So I had to think a little deeper. And it took me about 15 minutes as I pondered life and my existence and what I was about to do tomorrow, climbing on top of 4.5 million pounds of explosive propellant. It suddenly occurred to me, and this was a thought that stayed with me throughout my career, and I still think about this all the time. Tomorrow morning, when I wake up and climb on this vehicle, if bad things start happening and this vehicle starts coming apart, and the evil gods of death and destruction are conspiring with the laws of mechanics and physics, I'm going to spend my last seconds trying to save, in priority order, the crew, the vehicle, and the mission. And that really calmed me down. It essentially, I was taking myself out of the equation. Doesn't matter what happens to me tomorrow. If I can save the crew, I've done my job and I can die happy. Obviously, if I can save the hardware or the vehicle or the systems to live another day to complete the mission later, great. If we can complete the mission, better still. But I've always thought of those three things in any human endeavor. It's always about the people that you're working with, your team, the crew members, the other people, and that spurs us to greatness. And obviously the systems you have to protect for long-term viability of the company or the mission. And then finally, if you can accomplish the mission, better still. That helped me go to sleep and wake up the next morning refreshed and ready to go.
We're going to talk about safety and your book in a little bit and some of the things you did post NASA. But specific to what you were just talking about, you train for this stuff. Hours upon hours, days upon days, months. The G-force during a launch is supposedly, 3 times the force of gravity humans are normally exposed to on Earth, which can make people black out, blood struggling to get to the brain. Is that right? I mean, it's very easy for me to say, what is that like? But I mean, you're basically strapped in and forced to deal with that.
Yeah, so great question. It's the one thing that we do not simulate. I mean, obviously you can get in a chair and spin up and feel the force of gravity, and we train in airplanes pulling gravity, but it's in a slightly different direction, down vertically. This is through the chest. On the space shuttle, I'll jump ahead a little bit and tell you, during launch, under that oppressive 3 Gs of force, it's like a bear sitting on your chest. We had oxygen bottles that were connected to a chest strap, a harness that would push on our chest, and it would deflate the lungs. And if you ever allowed them to deflate, you felt like you could not reinflate them. So the trick was to completely inflate your lungs and then just use the diaphragm with quick panting breaths to breathe as you're going uphill. But none of that really matters. The physical side doesn't matter. The much more important aspect is the mental and the technical aspects of the mission. You must stay focused and not think farther than 10 seconds into the future. You have to anticipate a little bit, but you must be aware, be present, be here now, see everything, feel everything, sense everything, be aware of the computers, the engines, the thrust vector controller, the reaction control system jets, how the power generation system is working to create electricity, the displays. You're anticipating failures, thinking about mode boundaries. And that's what's occupying your mind. So you don't really think about the fear or the danger or the risk. That's all repressed to the back of your mind as you're concentrating on doing the job. And I remember on my first flight, I had to make an unanticipated, very important first decision about 7 seconds after liftoff. Fortunately, I made the right decision. About 20 seconds after liftoff, there's a lull where there isn't much going on for a few seconds. And I remember this very comforting thought came into my mind. wow, this is exactly like the simulators. You mentioned thousands of hours of simulators, and I still have the record for more simulator time than any other astronaut, because that's the key to success, is preparation and training. But I remember the thought flashed through my mind in about 2 seconds. Wow, this is just like the simulator, with the exception of the GForce that you're talking about, which is very oppressive. But that gave me the confidence that I was going to be able to make the right mental decisions. One last thing I'll say about the force, I always try to help the rookie crew members on every mission that I commanded to anticipate that physical force and be aggressive. Don't just sit there plastered in your seat because you feel like your arms are 3 times as heavy and you cannot lift your head off the seat. You have to be able to reach switches even under 3 Gs if you need to. If the vehicle starts coming apart, you got to do something. So be aggressive and move around and grab your bailer bar on your helmet and move your head to the side if you need to see to the side, and be very physically fit. And we do a lot of weightlifting before launch, and just be aggressive and don't feel like you have to sit there. Too many of the rookies just get plastered in their seat and they feel like they can't move, and that's the wrong way to do it.
Do you all speak a lot during a launch and while you're going up? I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, because I can't remember how long it takes to get up to space, to the International Space Station or whatever. I mean, how much conversation is there really?
Yeah, so another great question, Craig. Thanks a lot. So it's pretty interesting. A lot of crews will talk about things that are ancillary. What a great view, what a ride, oh, this is wonderful, all that kind of stuff. From the very first time, a year before the mission, when we were assigned as a crew, I would train my crew in the art of and the techniques and the principles of good communication. And I would only allow operationally relevant conversation in the cockpit during moments like the launch, which takes 8 minutes and 23 seconds to go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour. And the purpose wasn't really to inhibit their conversation. The purpose was really to encourage them to think operational thoughts. You can't tell people just be professional and only think about the right things, but you can tell them you're only allowed to say operationally relevant things. And so my crew was the first one on STS-113, was the first crew. I knew we were going to be really professional about this and not talk about things like football or the view or anything ancillary. The responsibility you have as a crew member is to only speak to me about things that you want me to respond to. And my responsibility to you, my commitment to you, is I will respond. I will think about what you're saying and will respond. So don't distract me from irrelevant things. But the crews were always so professional. Initially they think, well, why is he being such a stickler on this? But they began to realize in training long before the mission, oh, this is a great way to get us all to be thinking about the right things and mentally anticipate the many failures that can and do happen during a space shuttle launch. And so my crew on STS-113 was the first crew in all of spaceflight history where we actually put the audio in our post-flight crew video. So if you go find STS-113 and look at the crew video, there's a sequence where you hear exactly what we're talking about going uphill on the intercom that is normally not ever transmitted to people on the ground. But I decided to release that just specifically to show people how professional we were and how operationally relevant we were speaking. I mean, it pulls the crew together and it really gets you firing on all cylinders. And it's how the elite crews really, if you look at an elite team, you'll see that their communication is just outstanding. I worked with the anesthesia department in Mass General Hospital a couple of months ago, and it was just really impressive to watch them communicate, both verbal and nonverbal communication.
It's everything. I mean, it's everything in every walk of life. Your communication skills are really what determines a lot about your success, no matter what endeavor you take on. Look, I've got so many questions for you, and I don't want to run out of time with you. But let me talk about something here real quick. For all of our listeners, 6 space shuttle missions, but Jim, you are the only American astronaut to have commanded 5 space shuttle missions. That's remarkable, and I know that it probably puts your head to the pillow, as you talked about earlier, with a great deal of pride and comfort. Success and failure, as it pertains to one specific mission, any mission, is defined by what in your mind?
Well, there are 2 ways to think about that, I think. Success of a mission, of course, is the end result. If you succeeded in achieving the goal or created the accomplishment that you intended to, that is a great part of the success. But the way I tend to think about mission success is not from the end state, but it's from the process of how you get there. And I often tell executives in companies who, rightly so, are concerned because we got to hit the performance targets. We got to meet the numbers. We didn't do so well last quarter. We got to do better next quarter. And they entice and encourage and try to inspire their workforce to hit the numbers and achieve the end result. But if you think about it, the workforce, or even space shuttle astronauts, don't create results. We simply conduct activities. And if we can conduct higher quality activities with operating excellence, then the results follow. No single person ever creates mission success. As a team, we're all conducting activities, and it's the integration of those high quality activities over time that end up creating the success and the result that you want. And by the way, think about this: in a dangerous business, a single poor quality activity can create disaster. So it's not just integrated high quality activities over a period of time. You got to eliminate the mistakes as best you can, or at least eliminate the consequences of the errors that we inevitably make. So I tend to think of success as, of course, the end result, but if you can operate the entire mission with high quality techniques of operating excellence, then success comes.
Yeah. Did you ever come back from space back to Earth and say, they might have thought it was a success, but I didn't feel that way. I feel like we didn't do enough for what we were supposed to do.
So not on the overall mission accomplishment. All 6 of the missions and every mission that I was associated with as the director of flight crew operations that were flown under my command were deemed successful. But there will be on every mission small elements of the mission that weren't as well executed as they should have been, and you try to learn and you move on. I will say I'm very proud of my final mission, the 6th mission, and I have a lot of stories in the book about that mission, was such a success that we only made two errors in the entire 2-week evolution, thousands of operations, only 2 errors. And neither of those errors had any consequence, but it wasn't because the crew was so good. It was because we really involved the ground team. You have the hundreds of people in the Mission Control Center, and we really were firing as an elite team on all cylinders. And that's what I tend to think about as this was a huge success because the team did really well. I often think about the crew's job is easy. We climb on a rocket and live or die as a consequence of our own decisions and actions. But the mission controllers who are helping us, they have to live with the consequences of their decisions while somebody else may die. So their job is a lot harder than ours.
Hey everybody, I really want to tell you about Ahead, one of our new partners this season and now the official headwear provider of Tracks to Success. Creativity, a sharp look, dozens of styles to choose from. Ahead's been supplying the most prestigious events and outfitting the world's top golfers for 25 years, and it's perfect for you as well. So if you're looking to dress for success, make sure you think Ahead. Here's your chance to save big. Visit aheadusashop.com now and use the code TTSPOD. That's TTSPOD and receive 20% off your purchase. Ahead, the finest in headwear, the official headwear of the Tracks to Success podcast, and available at aheadusashop.com. How long does it take when you get back, by the way, when you've been in space for how long? How many days? What's average?
Each of my missions was 2 weeks, and when we went to the International Space Station, we'd stay for 8 days.
Okay. When you get back, how long does it take to walk normal again? Like what's that like?
So it depends on how quickly you're trying to readapt to Earth's gravity. You can do it very quickly, and within a couple of hours, you can certainly walk normal and pretty much feel normal, especially if you move your head around and get the neurovestibular system to resense the gravity and accelerations like we do down here on the Earth for 4.5 billion years, or all of human history. But also you could try to preserve the feeling of being in space longer by not moving around and reacclimatizing your neurovestibular system. And I did that after one mission where I purposefully walked very slowly and moved and, kept my head centered on my body and tried to preserve that feeling. And you can make it last for a couple of days, where you'll be sitting or laying in bed and wondering, why can't I just float up and go get a drink of water? Why do I have to exert so much energy to stand up?
Oh my. All right, let's go back in time. We'll get back to your missions and everything, but you shared about being 10 years old and whatnot. A lot of kids, myself included, when I was really little, they want to play astronaut, right? They want to be in make-believe an astronaut. Did you do that? Is that really what you wanted to be at that young age?
Yeah, so my quick story is I don't remember much before I was 10 years old. I think I was just kind of responding to the environment, kind of like an animal with no sense of future or past or connections and decision-making and all that. But all of a sudden, when I was 10, it was like a circuit breaker engaged in my mind, and I began to see, hey, there's a world out there, and I have a part in it, and I could remember, entire sequences of a day and what I did during that day. At the time, the Mercury 7 astronauts were flying. This is back in the early 60s. And I remember thinking one day, not I want to be an astronaut, but rather that's what I'm going to do. I will be an astronaut. And I had a very specific goal, which we can talk about later, in what I wanted to accomplish in space. But I never really told anyone other than my family. And I think I told one other friend, childhood friend, and he said, yeah, I'm going to be an astronaut too. And I thought, well, that kind of, even as a 10-year-old, I thought that kind of trivializes what I just said. So I never told anyone else. But as I grew older, I began to realize, there's really no chance of me, or very little chance of me, becoming an astronaut. But I'm always going to do the next best thing that I can do now. And so when it was time to go to college, I said to myself, aerospace engineering, that's what I love. I want to study that. I don't know what's going to become of it, but that's what I want to study. When it was time to graduate, I realized I didn't want to get a real job, so I decided to join the U.S. Navy and learn to fly on aircraft carriers. I figured that would be the best job on the planet, and it really was. I loved doing it. Did that for 3 years, and I looked around. I said, well, what's the next step I need to take? And I said, I'll apply to the test pilot school, learn how to be a test pilot and test airplanes. That will be really exciting, and I can combine my aerospace engineering and my interest in math and science with testing. It wasn't for the goal of becoming an astronaut, though I still wanted to be an astronaut. That was too far in the future. And then suddenly, after testing the F-18, the hottest new fighter for 3 years, just had, every job I've ever had has been the best job in the world. I said to myself, well, I have enough now. I've satisfied all the requirements. I guess I can apply to NASA. Never thought I would be selected. My wife said, well, you better apply because it's the only thing you've ever wanted to do. She didn't know what she was getting into. And I applied and feel very privileged and fortunate that I was selected to fly in space for our country 6 different times and had a bunch of management positions. But the point is twofold. I only took the next step that I could take But I also took the next step that I was really passionate about, and it has two benefits. Number one, you'll do really well at it if you're passionate about something. And number two, you won't have wasted your time if you don't get to do the next step. And as I say, every job I've ever had, I've really enjoyed. I've had so much fun doing what I've done throughout my career. It's just been a huge privilege. And that's what I try to tell folks is find your passion. Doesn't matter what it is, find your passion and just have fun and do really well at it.
You grew up in Flushing, New York. I'm assuming you loved science when you were a kid. You had to. I'm guessing as well you probably liked science fiction movies when you were a kid. I don't know. Maybe I'm way off base. Number one, is that true? And number two, who was your biggest role model growing up before you got to Notre Dame?
Yeah, so close on your assumption, but a little bit off. So I loved math and science. Never really had much of an appreciation or a affinity for science fiction. It just never interested me. I was interested in real science and the planets, and I would ask for Christmas presents. I'd ask for math books as a geeky kid.
Poor kid.
You know, our mutual friend Steve Stolz wanted me to mention that I was a real nerd in college, although I did hang around with all the business majors like Steve because they had much better parties. But so your question about role models, of course, my parents growing up, my father was the director of the Eastern region for American Airlines and the chief pilot for American, but was the leader, the manager of all the pilots. And so I watched him. I saw how he treated people with integrity and respect, even if he had to discipline them. He also was a 19-year-old bomber pilot in World War II, flying 43 missions over Germany. So I kind of learned from him the technical integrity side of there's one way to do a job, you got to do it right. Even if it's the harder of the choices, you know it's the right answer, you've got to do that. And of course, the other one was my mother, who was an Army nurse in World War II, did some time near the front lines in Belgium and France. And I learned from her kind of comedy. She was just a hilarious lady, and the way that she treated everybody with respect, and later became a national record holder for 9 distance records in running in the 16-hour category. You know, won the New York Marathon 4 times in her career. Wow. In the 16-hour category. So I learned from my parents. And then one final story I'll share. Just when I was young, at 10 years old, I would smuggle in a 9-volt transistor radio into class to listen to the Mercury missions. It was when they were first flying, John Glenn and the guys. And I got caught one day by Mrs. Johnson, my teacher. But rather than getting in trouble, she decided to pin up a map of the world. Said, okay, you continue listening, take these thumbtacks and plot the progress as they fly around the Earth. So I thought I was part of the space program, which to me was really inspirational. Yeah. 35 years later, I was the director of flight crew operations when John Glenn came back to fly for us. And as the director, I was responsible for delivering a nationally televised press conference, and the journalists were all interested in how does he feel? What did he eat for breakfast? What does he look like? What's he been saying? And as I was plotting his progress that morning, I suddenly blurted out this story about 35 years ago. I was plotting the progress as a 10-year-old in school, and here it is 35 years later, I'm doing the same thing, plotting his progress as he's getting ready to launch on a mission.
Wow. Hey, bear with me on this because I'm going to run through some things. You talk about Notre Dame, you graduate, you're off to the U.S. Navy. You mentioned that. Assigned to Attack Squadron 72, carried out 125 or so night carrier landings aboard the USS John F. Kennedy. Now I know what it's like to land a plane at like Midway Airport with a short runway. I mean, that's a real short runway. I don't know what that must feel like. You're then selected for the astronaut candidate program, which you mentioned, more than 7,000 hours flying in 20 different types of aircraft, which I assume is what it takes to have a chance to get to NASA. In 1985, you become an astronaut. Now, you talked about that, and you said, your wife said, well, you better apply, and then you get it. So that dream at 10 And the things you just talked about in class as a child and the inspiration, tell me about the feeling when they said, yes, you're in.
Probably the most professionally exciting feeling you could ever have. From a life perspective, emotional, most excitement I ever had was getting married to my wife. And then, of course, the first daughter being born and then the second daughter being born. But from a professional standpoint, being selected to be asked to join NASA, the only thing I've ever wanted to do, as you mentioned, is just the most exciting thing that you could ever imagine. I can't think of anything better than that. And my boss, who became my mentor for 20 years, very low-key kind of guy, George Abbey is his name. He's the father of the International Space Station. And by the way, he was mentored by George Low, who got NASA back on track after the Apollo 1 fire. And then George Abbey mentored me for 20 years. But he was the one who called on the telephone in this kind of very low-key way. I talk about him in my book a lot because he was such an inspiration to me. He said, I think his sentence was, "Do you still want to come and work for us?" And you're trying to suppress the emotion. Well, yes, sir. So it was pretty exciting.
Season 2 of Tracks to Success is brought to you by Presentation Partners. Presentation Partners is a unique team of award-winning executives helping you build a presentation others will be talking about. Presentation Partners teaches you the true art of storytelling. And if you haven't heard about their neuroscience of persuasion, you'll see how valuable it is to own it. Whether you're a company or an entrepreneur, Presentation Partners is the team you need behind you. For almost 15 years, they've helped clients raise millions in capital and countless dollars in sales simply by making top leaders successful presenters. The time is now to find your authentic voice and learn your authentic story. Presentation Partners, creating persuasive story presentations based on something other than just your good looks. Columbia, Discovery, Atlantis, Discovery, Endeavor. I think I got the order right. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't pay attention to it as much as certainly you would or others. I didn't realize there were multiples of the same thing all the time. Is there one mission or a moment up in space, up there, that stands out more than anything else to you?
Yes is the answer, but if you'll allow me, I'll mention two. Every mission you remember, all six of them stand out in my mind, but let me just mention two. So the first was my very first mission. Before we launched, I flew with Commander Dan Brandenstein, or Captain Dan Brandenstein, U.S. Navy, who was the chief of the astronaut office at the time. And he told me before we launched, he said, there's only three things you don't want to have happen in space: a fire, lose cabin pressure, or be spun out of control. And we had all three of those in the 13-day mission of STS-32. In addition, we had a computer failure, a big water leak that was getting all over the electronic equipment, threatening to fry everything and kill us all. We lost an inertial navigation system, multiple failures during the mission. None of them really, I actually enjoyed them. I know that sounds kind of weird, but that's what you train to do as an astronaut, is respond to emergency situations. So I was always anticipating and searching and looking for failures to try to identify them before they occur. So I responded to all of those, the way that I should. So that kind of stands out to me as a pretty exciting mission. But then if you'll allow me, the second example is my sixth mission, STS-113. So by this time, I had been the director of flight crew operations, responsible for all the astronauts, 150 at that time, and all the missions, and having them be successful with high quality. And I was also the lead in developing and codifying the techniques of operating excellence that we were using. And I kept trying to help, as I do now with corporations, to help companies to perform at elite levels, so here it is, my final mission, and a lot of self-induced pressure because I know I'm the guy that's telling people, here's how you conduct a mission. So I get one final opportunity to lead a crew into space. And that mission stands out because it was so flawlessly executed, not just with our crew and team, but with the team and the Mission Control Center and all the hundreds of thousands of people around the country who are supporting the mission. We had just developed such an elite level of teamwork and relying on each other and helping each other and understanding concepts like error wisdom and how do you mitigate the consequence of errors and use all the great techniques of operating excellence that were developed initially by the Mercury 7 astronauts and carried through the years through 19 groups of astronauts when I finally left the program. And to have that mission be so successful was kind of validation that the techniques really work. So that stands out in my mind. But it isn't the technical accomplishments. I hope you can hear in my voice and my explanations. It's the working together that really stands out in my mind. And I remember the people and the teams and the teamwork and the spirit of accomplishing the mission much more than actually performing the mission.
6'4", tallest guy to fly in space, by the way. That's kind of a cool little tidbit. Yes, the International Space Station, you've been there. Had a little meet up with the Russian space station, which is also pretty cool. At what point did you realize in all these missions that you really were the leader of the American space program?
You ended your question. I knew what I was going to say when you were in the process of asking your question, but you ended it, leader of the space program, and I would not ever say that. I was never the leader of the space program, but I still appreciate the question. The time that it really, the weight and the responsibility of leadership and command occurred to me the first time I commanded a mission. So it was my second mission, STS-52. And for the most part, during training, my job is to make sure the team is congealing and coalescing into an elite performance team. And that's, can be hard to do. There are signals that not many people understand to really see what is an elite team. But when you get up on the mission, so you plan everything and you train and you're ready to go and you feel like you're the best qualified and you go up in space, I suddenly realized as the commander, I'm not really doing a lot of the work. It's the crew that's doing a lot of the work, getting ready to deploy a satellite. And I'm sort of overseeing. And I was a little bit envious of the crew because they're having fun, they're doing great things. And I'm just overseeing. And suddenly there was a point where we're getting ready to deploy a satellite. And I had one crew member who was operating a little bit too fast, a little bit too quickly, and had the risk of making mistakes and making a mistake and not deploying the satellite. I had another crew member who was operating a little bit too slowly and methodically, trying to make sure that he or she didn't make any mistakes. So I had to figure out, how am I going to influence these two different people with two different problems and say something that's going to inspire the one crew member to go a little bit faster. And I had to understand, why was this person going too slowly? And with the other one, understand, why are they going too fast, and how do I inspire them to be a little bit more methodical? So you have to know the people, you have to know the technical way that astronauts think, and you have to try to inspire them. When that was successful, and by the way, I told them, if we don't get this deploy, I'm taking the responsibility and the accountability, not you. This will be my reason for not deploying the satellite if we never get there. And if we do deploy it, then you get all the credit because you're the ones doing the work.
That's leadership. Go ahead.
When we were successful in that deploy, I sat back and I floated back and I thought to myself, that was pretty cool. I like this kind of stuff, trying to help people. I'm trying to help them do better. And that really was a kind of the jumpstart of my really understanding. So I'm already a commander, I'm already in space, and I'm just now understanding what does it mean to be a leader.
Yeah. Neil Armstrong was a leader, had a special walk. I think most of us know about that. You played basketball with him. Is that right? What kind of a relationship did you have with Neil Armstrong?
So I did. When I graduated Notre Dame, the Navy took a little too long to process the paperwork. And again, I didn't want to get a job, so I applied to graduate school, was accepted at Cincinnati, where Professor Armstrong was teaching. It was after his career as an astronaut. He taught the undergraduates, and I was a graduate student, so he was not my professor, but we did have a basketball game that was fairly widely publicized. The professors and the graduate students, so I was on his team, or he was on our team, against the undergraduates. So that was kind of fun. But when the Navy, the other point I wanted to make was 2 points about Neil Armstrong. When the Navy finally did come through and they said, you have a class date that starts in August, I was going to leave before I completed my master's degree and my thesis, or my course requirements, which were not that many left. I think my professor, my mentor at the time, who was a great guy, Professor Crespo da Silva, who's now retired, he asked Professor Armstrong to come in and talk to me to try to convince me to stay in graduate school. And so he came and spoke to me for about 15 minutes one night. It was a Friday night, was working on my thesis, really kind of frustrated with the problem. And I saw him standing over me, and I looked up, and there's Professor Armstrong. And he talked to me for about 15 minutes and tried to convince me that this was as close as I would ever be to completing a master's degree. And I just kept saying, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he finally got to the end of his spiel, and he looked at me and he said, he was a former naval aviator, flew in the Korean War, and then became an astronaut, as you know. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think I'm convincing you, am I? I said, no, sir. He said, well, good luck. Have fun. I know I did. And I saw him 15 years later, after I had been an astronaut, and he came back through a reunion, and he remembered that story. I've played in the band with his son, Rick Armstrong. He's a bass player. I'm a drummer. So that's kind of fun every time I get to play with him. But I wanted to make one other important point about Neil Armstrong. He was, I think, widely recognized as the perfect choice to be the first human to walk on the moon. He was not about the ego. It was all about the mission and being a team player. And he really was the perfect choice to be the first person. He didn't care about the fame or the glory or being first. He was the best choice. I knew Sally Ride and worked with her. She was by far the best choice to be the first American woman to fly in space. Didn't care one bit about being the first, understood the responsibility, but she was the best choice. I flew with Eileen Collins on her first mission she was my co-pilot, as she was a rookie, first woman pilot at NASA. By far the best choice to be the first woman pilot. Didn't care one bit about being the first, understands the role model that she is and does that very well, but she just wanted to fly in space. That's the kind of person that you want to be the first. We're getting ready, I'm almost done here, Kraig. We're getting ready to launch the Artemis mission, which is the twin sister of Apollo. President Trump has decided we were going to send people back to the moon by 2024. And a lot of people are making a big deal about the fact we're going to have the first woman to walk on the moon. But I guarantee you, Kraig, the first woman who is chosen to walk on the moon will be the best. It won't be that she is excited about being the first woman. She's going to be the best choice to walk on the moon. That's the message that I want to tell folks. She'll understand the importance of being a role model, but she really is going to be the best choice, the most professional woman astronaut, and the best person to walk at that time.
And that applies to every business. That's just how it should be. It makes total sense. I have to ask you about 2003 and the Columbia disaster. You played an important role in the aftermath of that tragic event that included searching for remains. Tell me about that. My guess is that as difficult as that might have been, there had to be some sort of real honor and responsibility to take part in that?
Kraig, when I think back on my career and all the accomplishments which you've mentioned, the 6 flights, that's not what I remember the most, or what I take pride in the most. The sense of accomplishment that I have is leading a team of 2,000 people who were asked on February the 1st to go find, locate, recover with dignity, honor, and reverence the human remains of the Columbia crew. Essentially, they told me, go find your 7 friends, unlimited budget, unlimited resources, no rules, go find them. And to see 45 different organizations, all the way from the White House down to the local restaurants, helping us, and all the civilian population in East Texas who gave up their careers temporarily to help us with a mission of finding the 7 crew members was truly an honor to lead that team. I feel like I had so much training and mentoring throughout my career before that I was prepared to make the kinds of decisions that we had to make to go find them. Truly an honor to work with the people and accomplish that. And in the back of my mind, the whole time we were doing that mission, I kept thinking, someday in the next life, I may have an opportunity, if I'm lucky, to go see Rick Husband and his crew, and I want to be able to tell them we did the best we could. So that kind of drove us to dig deep and perform with operating excellence and find the crew and recover them with dignity, honor, and reverence.
Post NASA, you've done quite a bit. You've been really, really busy. You retired from the U.S. Navy in 2004. You retired from NASA in 2005. You became a consultant. You got into the oil and gas industry for BP as a safety auditor. I mean, you just couldn't put it down, I mean, you've got a lot to give people. Was it hard to retire, or you just felt another calling?
So I jokingly say I've tried to retire 3 times and it hasn't worked. I think there's always something I want to do. I don't fly now because it requires significant amount of mental energy and effort to do it professionally and with operating excellence. And there are too many other things I want to do. Now it's time for me to share what I've learned and what I've been taught and all the lessons throughout the years with companies who are involved in dangerous businesses and try to help them. I find that intensely satisfying to go into a company that has asked me to come in and to share with them, here's a slightly different way you can think about this to help your workforce to not only prevent all accidents, including unpredictable ones, but also operate with peak efficiency and effectiveness and accomplish the very thing you're trying to do, which is to, improve the results next quarter. How do you help people and inspire them to operate with high quality work and operating excellence? So I just find it really intensely satisfying. I also think there's very little difference between drilling down 5 miles under the sea with the intense pressures and the physical dangers that they have in the oil and gas industry. It's identical to the space program. People kept looking at me as an astronaut in the oil and gas industry. How did you change jobs? And I said, well, I didn't really change jobs. I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to help people manage hydrocarbons, control the energy, and deliver energy to the world, or use the energy to explore space. We're either exploring down or we're exploring up, but it's all the same humans trying to manage and control the risk.
In addition to hosting this podcast, Kraig leads the Kann Advisory Group, focused on elevating communication for companies and individuals. Company consulting, empowering team and individual workshops, mind-altering webinars, and Kraig's inspiring keynotes for your conference or company meeting. They're all on the menu of services. Kann Advisory helps companies clarify their message, helps professionals build and showcase their brand, and helps everyone present their best selves. So if you're the leader of a team or company looking to give your employees a game-changing one-day experience, or an individual who wants to become a speaker and presenter that gets other people talking, visit CannAdvisory.com. And when you do connect, make sure to mention the Tracks to Success podcast to receive a special discount on any of the Kann Advisory services. That's CannAdvisory.com. Now back to the interview.
Talking with Jim Wetherbee, 20-year career with NASA, among so many things. And I'm going to throw the book in there because you kind of just teed me up with that. The book is called Controlling Risk, 30 Techniques for Operating Excellence. Operating excellence. That's what you just mentioned. Your whole career was about minimizing risk and taking risk, if you get right down to it. What's your message in the book? If you're walking on a stage talking to people, what stands out about that we could take in as a quick hit message for all of us?
So when I get up on stage, I try to tell a lot of stories and show pictures. I have very few word charts, but let me just explain the premise since you asked of the concept. Most companies manage risk and they do it very well. Occasionally they have accidents and tragedy and people die. But for the most part, when a company manages risk, the product of that management is to assess the risk and assign a qualitative assessment. And it's kind of a notional calculation. And then they issue rules, policies, and procedures. I mean, you know this very well. You go into any company and they have rules for doing everything. The problem is those rules, policies, and procedures, which are mandatory, are often closed and non-adaptive, and they won't help you. They won't help the worker in the situation where he or she picks up the toolbox and they go to work and suddenly the hazard is different today than it was yesterday. Yes, they still follow the rule, the policy, and the procedure, but they're going to get bit and they're going to get killed if they don't think about hazards differently than the managers who are managing risk. So when the worker goes to work in a dangerous environment, they're thinking of techniques that are based on principles, which are open-ended and adaptive. And if you follow the proper principles of operating excellence and high quality work, not only will you stay alive and prevent even the unpreventable or unpredictable accidents, but you also will operate at peak efficiency and effectiveness. It's just wonderful when you see a crew of really physically dirty, oily drillers who are out drilling a well, and they pause and they tell you how they think when they're exposed to these extreme hazards. And they say things like, you know, if we see a tool that keeps getting in the way as we're tripping pipe down the hole, which takes, you know, several 15 minutes or an hour, depending upon the depth of the hole, we will pause, remove the hazard, and then we go back to work slowly and methodically, and we will accomplish much more by being slow and methodical and working with high quality. When you see folks who are high school dropouts who understand the concept of controlling risk and the way they think to do it correctly, to me, that's really inspiring. And that's the message is I try to help executives who have not been exposed to the way that workers think, who are really working at elite levels. And if the executives can understand, if I help the people with improving the quality of their activities, now they will achieve the results that we all want, and they'll prevent accidents.
Winding up our time together, how many presidents have you met? How many times have you been to the White House as a hero of the space program?
3 times as an astronaut. I've been in the Oval Office, spent 5 hours with President Clinton one day. That was kind of an interesting evolution. Alone in the Oval Office, he ushered us out, closed the door, and I looked around. We had one other crew member, and there was no one around. And we had to find our way out of the White House with no escorts. So 3 times as an astronaut, and once last year, a friend of mine works as a lawyer in the White House and was invited back to the White House. So, you know, it's always inspiring to go into the Oval Office and see and talk to people. Like, it's the other, by the way, benefit, privilege that I've had of being an astronaut. I love talking to the dirty roughnecks on an oil rig, and I love talking to presidents of countries and kings of nations. They're all humans, and they're all people, and they're all interesting, and they're all fun to talk to.
All right, I want you to give me 30 seconds on each of these, if it's even possible. A couple of quick hitters. We talk about time, and days and hours on Earth. Is time different in space? Explain that as quickly as you could.
So the scientific answer is I am 7 nanoseconds younger than I would have been had I not gone into space. But so what? Time, what you sense is speed, and you kind of run out of time to do everything you want to do up in space. But that's the excitement of it, is you're trying to work at peak efficiency and effectiveness when there's little time.
Your favorite thing about the International Space Station? How big is it? Is it like the size of a block or a house or two houses? How big is it?
So I had the privilege of trading out the first crew. I think we're on crew 63 or something now. When I helped to design, construct the space station, even then it was over 100 feet long. So you could float from one end to the other as if you were Superman, just floating down this long tube. Or you could imagine, you just flip your brain and imagine it's a well, and you drop down into the well 100 feet this way and spring up from the bottom and come back to the top, or like an elevator shaft. So just the immense size of being able to float in that kind of volume was the thing I enjoyed the most about it.
Landing the shuttle, right? You've landed planes on aircraft carriers. How cool is that?
It's about the coolest thing ever, on or off the planet, on both. Landing on an aircraft carrier, which, by the way, the Navy has you do it the very first time solo, because why risk the life of an instructor pilot on something so dangerous? And now, years later, you have to land a space shuttle with the whole world watching. And I kind of thrive on that pressure and the demands of controlling vehicles like that. And I really enjoyed it. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that more times than anyone. And I guess there's a record that will never be broken, because we're not flying the space shuttle anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you a couple of other things. You're a guy who lives quietly now in Oregon, peaceful state, right? Beautiful country landscape. What moves you these days? You're a tennis guy, right? And you already said you're a drummer. So I find that interesting as well. How often do you play the drums?
Well, we're getting ready. So the original astronaut rock band called Max Q has been delayed now. We're supposed to play with the Orlando Symphony Orchestra, I think next May. So we're gearing up for that. We'll play 3 songs with them. So that'll be a lot of fun. My latest passion is I live on the 14th green of a pretty famous golf course called Tethrow. So I'm trying to learn that silly sport, and I think I'm addicted.
Wow, that's cool. This podcast is called Tracks to Success. You've flown at speeds people can't relate to. You've represented your country in the most amazing way. What would you tell people listening here about dreams and shooting for something that most could never dream possible?
So I go back to kind of our original conversation at the beginning of this. I would tell folks, find something you're passionate about and then methodically go after it. Don't let anyone deter you. Take it step by step. Really enjoy the journey of mastering whatever you're doing at the current time. Stay in the present. Think a little bit about the future, but stay in the present and really enjoy life. It's also the secret to longevity. If you enjoy every moment, you're going to get to the end of your life and think that was a pretty full life. And I already think that now. I really try to stay in the moment. It's just like launching on a space shuttle. You got to stay in the moment and enjoy every minute of it. And I want to thank you, Kraig, because this has been a lot of fun for me. I've enjoyed every question you've asked, and I'm, trying to think of the right answers. So stay in the moment, be passionate about what you're trying to achieve, and then just go after it.
Are you the first guy in line, by the way, for the next, outer space movie? And did you like Tom Hanks in Apollo 13? Are these movies realistic at all? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I met Ron Howard, the director, and the actors, Tom Hanks and the folks, before I was up at NASA headquarters. They wanted that movie to be very realistic, so they solicited NASA's help. And it is probably the most realistic space movie that there is. They did a very good job, only a couple of minor exceptions. But yeah, I thought that was a great movie. And I know Jim Lovell, who Tom Hanks portrayed, and he's just a wonderful human being. And I couldn't think of a better match of Tom Hanks and Jim Lovell, just American heroes. So I loved the movie. I thought it was very realistic.
Good. I needed to ask that before we go. Here's my final thing. How often, in the place that you live, do you sit on the porch and look into space?
Always when there are guests or family members who are visiting us, but it's never in looking back. I never look back. I will remember it fondly. I'll tell stories and try to share the experience with people because that's my responsibility and I enjoy doing it. But I never miss it. I remember it fondly. I never look back. I'm always looking to the future. What can I do next? But yeah, it's fun to, look up at the stars and think about how many of them there are, and think about the solar system and the galaxy and the universe and all that. I just love thinking about those kinds of concepts.
This has been awesome. You're an inspiration, and you're a hero in a lot of ways to a lot of people. You should be so proud. I know your family is, and I'm honored that I got to spend a little bit of time with you. Thank you so much for being a part of Tracks to Success.
Kraig, thanks a lot for doing what you do and helping so many people. It was a privilege for me to be with you. Thanks.
In my conversation with Jim, he talked about his responsibility to the country and the brand that is NASA. And that leads me to my one last thing. If you want to be an influencer, never forget the brand you represent. It may be the company or the organization, but it's also the people, and it's also you. I've always believed that even in working for someone else, you have to keep focused on yourself and making sure that you represent the best of you. Jim soared into space, and when you're climbing to your highest peak, make sure you think about the bigger picture and the greater cause that you're fortunate to be a part of. Even entrepreneurs who work for themselves still represent an industry. So work to deliver big for the brand you represent. Find ways to add great talent and gifts to the team, and challenge yourself to push your company and industry to a higher place. No different than Jim Wetherbee did as he helped take the country's space program to new heights. Do all that, and your Tracks to Success will be a whole lot easier. Please do me a favor, take a moment to rate this podcast for me. Give it a review. It means a lot. Until next time, I'm Kraig Kann. Thanks so much for listening.
You've been listening to Tracks to Success, brought to you by Presentation Partners, visual storytellers passionate about connecting presenters with their audience. Don't forget to subscribe to the show for more great interviews and thoughts on reaching your highest personal and professional summit. You can follow Kraig on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @Kraig Kann. And for exclusive Tracks to Success content and news about our upcoming guests, you can find Tracks to Success on Twitter. It's @Tracks to Success.